Hello and welcome to another episode of How Money Really Works. I'm Peter.
And I'm Stephen. On today's show, politics, power and money collide. And we'll look at the fallout from the latest Epstein-linked revelations in the UK, the renewed focus on Peter Mandelson, and what any of this means for Keir Starmer's authority and market confidence.
Then I'm in Shanghai and we'll be talking about how Keir Starmer's visit to China was seen here, what visa liberalisation actually changes, and whether British businesses stand to gain.
And finally, when politics feel unstable, where does money go? Gold, silver, crypto, hedge speculation, or something else entirely? Remember, this is not financial advice. It's a chat about how money really works.
Well, quick one before we start. Apologies for the show being late last week. We ran into some technical issues that were, all my fault. A massive thank you, though, to Frankie Francis for stepping in at the last minute as a guest. Do go back and listen to last week's pod if you haven't already and let us know if you like that sort of thing. We might have a few more things like that coming up later in the year.
Yeah, thanks everyone who's been sharing the show. It really genuinely makes a difference. You can follow us on Instagram at HMRWpod and TikTok at How Money Really Works. The links to those and other places to find us are in the podcast show notes. If you've got a question you'd like us to tackle, drop it in the comments or send it through the socials.
And as always, nothing that you hear here is personal financial advice. Speak to a qualified professional before making any big decisions. Right, let's get into it. First up, the renewed political noise around the Epstein files, Peter Mandelson, and what this means for Keir Starmer. Right, I'll try and catch us up with what I know from where we are over here in China. In the UK this week, political controversy has intensified around the fallout from the Epstein files and related appointments. Prime Minister Keir Starmer's under pressure after admitting he appointed Lord Mandelson as ambassador to Washington, despite concerns about Mandelson's past social contact with Jeffrey Epstein. Police are investigating Mandelson for possible misconduct related to those ties, and his appointment has fueled criticism of Starmer's judgment. Opposition MPs have also focused on the recent appointment of former Number 10 Communications Director Matthew Doyle to the House of Lords, with Starmer stripping him of the Labour whip after revelations about Doyle's past support for someone later convicted of possessing abusive material. Critics, including Conservative leader Kemi Badenoch, arguing these episodes raise questions about standards and vetting at the very top of government. Stephen, what's happened so far? I mean, when I left Europe, I left from Berlin to Zurich, then over to Shanghai. Morgan McSweeney had just quit. Anything else that's come out in the last few days?
No, you leave Europe for just a few days, Peter, and it all goes to pot, doesn't it? How dare you? I think to try and the fact that people start knowing the name Morgan McSweeney might actually have become the issue. Like when the chief of staff ends up becoming a headline himself, it would appear that they didn't have much choice to accept his resignation, if that indeed is what it was. So no, I think you're pretty much up to date. As we speak now, we're in the middle of Prime Minister questions, so I'm not actually seeing any fallout from that because what time is it over there? It's 1 in the morning, is that right, Pete?
It's about no, not just yet. It's about 10:05 at night here in Shanghai.
Right.
But just on the Morgan McSweeney one and exactly what you said, these advisors, they're never supposed to be in front of the camera. What they're supposed to do is, advise the Prime Minister. And also their other role is to slip bits of information to the likes of me, the journalists that are covering the political lobby in Westminster. Not that I do that, but where I do cover the political lobbies, mostly in Berlin and in Brussels, it's up to them to slip us a few bits of information about what's happening. Obviously, the information that the politician in question wants to hear. So him actually going won't make a vast amount of difference because the real truth is there's a whole load of Morgan McSweeney's just behind him, ready to step into it. But when it comes to the financial side of this and the big picture impact on finances, when a Prime Minister faces questions about judgment and appointments at the top level of government, because that's really what we're looking at here. He's put Mandelson into a position which is one of the most senior positions you can be in UK politics, in the House of Lords. And then, of course, made him ambassador to the United States. When you put somebody like Mandelson into that position, does that start to affect investor confidence when this all comes out, or do markets only react when policy itself is at risk?
I mean, I don't know what we grade this podcast as. So I think talking about Peter Mandelson and the word position in the same sentence would probably need to be a bit careful, Peter.
Yeah, well, this is going to get us an explicit tag if it's right.
I won't go into too much detail of that picture with him in his pants. So markets care about stability. They don't like uncertainty. And if controversies like this escalate to the point where a prime minister's position looks vulnerable or even potentially untenable, if we go back to Monday night, it felt that the Labour leader up in Scotland, I forget the guy's name, kind of went over the top first of all, saying that he should resign, and then nobody followed him, bless him, so he was left all by himself. Investors start asking a different question, and it's what happens next. So leadership uncertainty introduces policy uncertainty. And I'm not a huge expert in these things, Pete, that's why you're there. But if we look at if Keir Starmer wasn't to be around, it seems like he's lasted this week now. Good done, Prime Minister's Question Times. The next hurdle is the by-election in Gorton. If he gets through that, we're then back to what we have been talking about, which was the May local elections. But if he does go, who would follow him? And from a market perspective, it's unlikely, it would seem, to be somebody who would be equally as centrist left as him, possibly a harder left of the Labour Party. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, try not to talk too much about my own politics. What they don't like is the fact that from a bond market perspective, when Andy Burnham said, well, why are we in hock to the bond markets? Well, kind of the reason is they've spent an awful lot of time for the last few years talking about Liz Truss and her mini budget. And that's what happens when bond markets think that governments aren't going to stick to the rules. So if a change from Keir Starmer led into a slightly more left-leaning policy direction, the bond markets will get worried that there's going to be more borrowing and interest rates would go up. And then now you're talking about the personal finance, you're then talking about mortgage rates as well. So that's what happens with uncertainty. Never mind the fact that, it doesn't look fantastic from an international dimension. So frequent changes of the Prime Minister basically signal instability to overseas investors, foreign partners. So yeah, on the global stage, consistency probably really matters. I mean, from your perspective, Pete, it's probably quite alien over there in China to suspect that we're going to be even contemplating a new Prime Minister 18 months after one's just been appointed. There's no long-term planning. That's the bit that kind of freaks out markets.
I mean, absolutely. And when you're looking at the reaction to it over here in China, we'll come on to some of the reactions to Keir Starmer a little later on in the show. But yeah, people can't actually believe that a politician could have this level of scandal and still be in a job. And that has got to be worrying for a prime minister, that his only real saving, I don't want to say his only real saving grace, but one of the ones they keep referring to is he is somebody who's genuinely liked on the world stage by politicians and in some other countries by other countries' electorate. Mm. If they're looking at this and thinking, hang on, he employed that fella to do that, then that then becomes weakened, and it weakens his whole perception abroad as well.
So, as you say, if this becomes a story about standards and vetting right at the heart of government, you just mentioned it there, what that means for Starmer's authority is it's very difficult to project stability on the world stage, right?
Not just at the world stage. I mean, that's more domestically, because domestically he's under fire from every single side. And I have to say, when I got on that flight on Sunday, I mean, realistically, we arrived probably early hours of Tuesday morning, if that makes any sense, because of distances and time differences. What I kind of expected was to arrive here and Keir Starmer perhaps not be Prime Minister, because it's that serious. In fact, we were speaking when we met, just to let the listeners in, we do meet up every now and again. We met up very briefly on Thursday, I think, on Thursday evening, aboard the the bejesus out of your wife, Lucy, talking about why this was the biggest scandal to face British politics since the Profumo affair. And it was even more, it was bigger than the Profumo affair. So really, every single day, Keir Starmer right now is fighting for his political life, and those around him are fighting for their political life as well. Because you mentioned the Labour leader in Scotland blowing his own whistle and running over the top by himself, saying he had to go. Look, fair play to him for doing that, but it does leave you looking quite embarrassed afterwards. But there are plenty of Labour MPs who are ready to do that as well. They're just waiting for that moment where this scandal becomes too heavy and he has to go. Whether it's this scandal by itself, or it's this scandal plus by-election defeat, or if it's this scandal plus by-election defeat plus heavy losses in the local elections, I do think from a political point of view of a party, the Labour Party have to have a word about, can we continue down this path? Because are we now just doing more and more damage to ourselves? Now, of course, on the other hand, you have to weigh in what a change would bring. Because plenty of Labour politicians, plenty of Labour MPs and advisors, when the Tories switched and swapped time and time again, said, hang on, we've got to have a general election, surely, because the people didn't vote for you. Now, I know that's not how our system works, but it should be, really, if you think about it and how it's perceived. So I think what you're going to see is he's going to be under attack right now until he either pulls out the miracle of political miracles or he falls to one blow too many.
Yeah, and then are we back to the Peter Mandelson affair there, are we? No, I think that the thing that, the party who might be sitting there rubbing their hands quite happily on the sidelines, if their vibe is the uni party and they're just the same, they're all the same, whether it's a red rosette or a blue rosette, there's a turquoise rosette and reform, it completely plays into their hands, I'd imagine. Now, back to stability, financial services, markets, they'd be quite happy just to stick with the plan as long as possible. So yeah, that's from a financial advice perspective. Keep the hat on, keep the tin hat on. It's going to be a rough ride.
I think so. I wouldn't imagine, put it this way, my birthday is coming up at the end of April, so just before those elections in May. I would be surprised if Keir Starmer was still Prime Minister before those local elections. However, I've been wrong before, I'll be wrong again, and let's see how this one plans out. But yeah, this is about as much under fire as I've ever seen a Prime Minister for something that is really quite serious, and it's hugely damaging domestically. It's also massively damaging abroad as well.
Now to China. You're in Shanghai, where Starmer visited recently in an attempt to, how do you describe it, Peter? Thaw what had become a bit of a frosty relationship between the UK and China under the last few years of Tory rule.
Yeah, make no bones about it, the Conservative Party did not make any attempts to try and find a solution to the relationship with China, or the relationship between London, Westminster and Beijing. What we did see was a fairly positive, I guess, visit from Keir Starmer. I did see how he was being castigated in the media at home, as that, they sent a lower level aide to give him a tour around the Forbidden City and some other bits and pieces. I wouldn't read a whole lot into that. What I did get, and what I have taken away from, the meetings I've had today. In fact, I was having dinner just before I've come to speak to you. I was having dinner with go through who the people were. I mean, we're looking at some former military officers, some quite senior military officers. They're all retired now. Some retired civil servants, people who run quite large, medium-sized businesses. And also people who are just generally interested in what's going on around the world. Not one of them, and some of these are my direct family. I must point out, I'm actually coming to you from my mother-in-law's front room right now. But some of them are direct family. Not one of them could name the British Prime Minister. They'd seen him on the TV. And they thought, he did all right. He seemed to have looked okay. Quite a few people were impressed that he could use chopsticks. It was one thing. My father-in-law pointed out that it was ever so sweet that he tried to pay for some cookies that he bought from a store in Shanghai, but with cash. Nobody uses cash for anything here, apart from at this time of year putting into red envelopes to give to people as gifts for Chinese New Year, which is the very traditional way to hand off a gift. So he came across as a little bit quaint, a little bit was Paddington Bear strolling around China. But what the aim was certainly wasn't to come across like that. His aim was to focus on stabilizing a trade relationship, rebuilding dialogue between London and Beijing. China, of course, offering that expansion of short-term visa-free access. So what that means is that if you come on a tourist visa, you can come for 30 days. You can also use that to come and set up business meetings. The UK government framed that engagement as pragmatic economic diplomacy. I think they were definitely right in doing that. Critics argue, though, that it carries political risk at home. Obviously, the Tories, the same old Tories. We're looking at you, William Hague. We're looking at you, Chris Patten, former, was the last governor of Hong Kong. They've jumped all over that. The central question comes out, though, is whether easier access and warmer signalling translate into any real trade flow and business opportunities. Now, I mentioned in the show a couple of weeks ago that when they did this for some countries in Europe, some other countries in Europe, I'm thinking particularly Spain and Germany, where I know a little bit about. Yes, it certainly has. I know that during the pandemic, there was a drop-off in trade everywhere, but doing business meetings over Zoom, over Riverside, let's give them a plug since we're using them, or other video conferencing software that does exist. Yeah, the video conferencing softwares are available, but if any of them do want to sponsor us, we are available and willing to give you the plug that you would like. Anyway, yes, they don't really like doing it. It's not the way the Chinese like to do business. They like that face-to-face meeting, and allowing people to come over here and do those face-to-face meetings. I know that was incredibly beneficial for some of those manufacturing companies in Germany that I've made stories with, I've filmed with for TV reports. And I'm thinking of one particular filtration company who were over the moon. Herding Filtration down in northern Bavaria.
Shout out to Herding Filtration.
Shout out to Herding Filtrations. Mr. Herding, answer my calls, answer my emails. I need you for an interview when I'm back in the middle of March sometime. But yes, so it was beneficial for them. They were able to go over, able to have these meetings. The Chinese love to welcome guests. They like to be able to show off what they've got going on over here. And I have to say, to anybody who's thought about coming to China and then being put off by the prospect of having to get a visa, I know to anybody who's gone through it, it is quite simple to do. However, I also realise that if there's an extra stop in the way, it does put some people off. Do use this opportunity. It is a fantastic place to come and visit. And if you do have business out here, or you have the thinking, well, how could I enhance or perhaps even get off the ground some type of trade with China, this is the time to try and do it. On a little bit of a note of why Peter's always in the wrong place at the wrong time, do you want to know what happened on the day that it was announced that there was going to be visa-free travel for the Brits?
Go on, Peter, tell me.
I went to the Chinese visa center in Berlin to go and collect my brand new 2-year visa for China that I just spent 240 on. So there you go. At least I've got that for the next 2 years, and I can stay for 90 days instead of the 30. But 30 days, very good opportunity to be able to go and do that. I think what you'll find is it's very much symbolism. It's very easy for the Chinese to do this. It doesn't cost them anything. I can tell you that they have it all absolutely set up in the big major airports that you would fly into, those huge hubs. We flew into Shanghai. I'm backwards and forwards to China fairly regularly through the year. I'm also backwards and forwards to the United States through the year. I can tell you 100% whose immigration services I like to go through more, whose immigration services have previously hounded me through or herded me through places in Atlanta with their dogs while screaming at me, and who was perfectly pleasant and wished me a happy Chinese New Year. It's really easy when you come here, and they've set it up specifically for that. They want your tourist money. They also want the business trade. So it was a very easy thing for China to do. They've gone ahead and done it. I'd be interested to see what the uptake is from the UK citizens as opposed to other European citizens. I can tell you the flight we were on from Zurich was absolutely packed with people from all over Europe on there, coming over to Shanghai for a mixture of either overseas Chinese people coming back for Chinese New Year, or business people coming over here to try and put in a few deals ahead of the big Chinese holiday that starts, I think, on Friday is when everybody knocks off work. But Stephen, when you look at events like this with a major economic player like China, and the world's second largest economy, I think that all depends on which metric you look at, whether it's almost neck and neck or even slightly ahead of the United States these days. But do events like this change how people think or change how markets think about global equity exposure, or is that just noise for long-term investors?
Noise. That's the short answer. So most global equity portfolios already have exposure to China. It's the second largest economy. Why would you not want to have some exposure to that kind of growth engine? And so whether people realize that or not, China's already part of what they've got in pensions and investments. And not just through emerging market funds, but through multinational companies. If you look at the FTSE 100, an awful lot of the profit that is made from the likes of Procter and Gamble, they're selling huge amounts of their goods to the Chinese market and is bringing the profit back to the UK. So this is like part of the global trade and how the ecosystem all works. Diplomatic shifts kind of don't necessarily create or remove this exposure, and markets will price that in continuously. I'm wondering from a personal perspective, not just personal for clients, if a relationship feels like it's better, the inherent kind of bias people might have to go, what's this Chinese investment inside my pension? If the noise and the tone is better, they might be more open to that. I'm not saying that I've felt that in the past, but I guess that's a human emotion reaction. Generally speaking, whether it's this news or any news to do with the world stage, this is the first week, Peter, we haven't managed. I haven't been able to shoehorn a Donald Trump impression in because it's been moderately quiet because it's either been Keir Starmer or what we're talking about with China. But whatever is happening on the world stage, investors often go wrong because they react to the headlines, and either they reduce their exposure when relations look tense, and then they increase it again when things appear to improve. Generally, it means they're selling uncertainty but buying optimism. I guess that's what, from a human nature perspective. From a planning perspective, it's more important to see where your asset allocation reflects your time horizon, I call it. Go with me. So if you're investing short term for something in the next couple of years, maybe you don't want any risk at all. So you'd be looking more like cash investments. But if you're investing for retirement or longer term investment, the natural kind of waves of investment cycles can be your friend. So having some exposure to risk is a good thing. Again, what do we say, Peter? Not financial advice, just financial education. So geopolitical risk is permanent. If I had a penny for everybody, every time I heard somebody say, well, the way the world is at the moment, son, I really don't think I can invest. But how far back do you go? So the solution is diversification. Don't have all your eggs in one basket across regions, across sectors, across currencies, rather than trying to anticipate or predict every diplomatic shift that Peter tells us about each week, every Thursday on our podcast. Here's one for you. Focus on the tides, not the waves. How lovely. That's linked back to China in particular. And it would be nice to think that some small business from some level I'm sitting now might think, I make a nice product. I wonder if I was to go to China, could I find a way to make it cheaper or have a bigger market? And am I right in thinking, just to summarize this section up, I suppose, culturally, the Chinese much prefer to do things face to face. So actually pressing skin and being across there and say hello to somebody culturally is important for developing those ties rather than having to do it via Zoom, Riverside or other.
Absolutely. And I think what you've touched on as well, when you mentioned the Northeast, Sunderland, our home city as well, it's worthwhile pointing out that while nobody could name Keir Starmer at dinner, every single person who I've met since I've been here, now these are people who I've known for a while, but every single one of them has pointed to, hey, your football team's doing all right now, aren't they? Because obviously with Sunderland being up in the Premier League, they are on Chinese TV here and people are watching them and, the results that they've been getting. That is soft power that Britain has. I mentioned Paddington Bear earlier on. He's everywhere over here as well, because these are things that we do have. Now, my father-in-law also mentioned the fact that whiskey tariffs are reduced. That means he's going to be able to get a bottle of his preferred drop at a better price than he could as well. So he's quite happy with that. So whether there's a lot of things that Britain has that the Chinese are very keen on, whether it's clothing brands or the luxury brands that exist from the UK, or things like even stuff like theatre, musicals, cinema, TV shows, all of these music, all of these great things that we do produce and make in the United Kingdom. Chinese consumers, Chinese audiences are very, very keen on them. So we do have things that China would like. And this is one thing I've heard chucked towards Keir Starmer was, but what does China have that we want? Well, quite a lot. and we have quite a lot to offer. And if we were to, jump on those planes and come over and try and market some of that stuff, we might find that we would be pushing against an open door in many cases.
So yeah, back to Keir. Is deeper engagement with China just pragmatic economics or a domestic political risk for Starmer? Quite a big question there, Pete.
It is. Everything Keir Starmer does right now is domestic political risk, but we'll take that one head on, and we look towards the criticism that he has been receiving from, as I mentioned, the usual faces within the Tory party. We've also seen a lot of criticism over the recent jailing of Jimmy Lai from Hong Kong. Now, it's worthwhile pointing out with this, he's been sentenced to 20 years for essentially colluding with foreign governments to try and overthrow part of the regional government structure of China. That's what he's been convicted of. He had an open trial in which all of the evidence was put forward and broadcast. That is never mentioned when it's talked about. Now, I listened to Nancy Pelosi this morning from the US saying how it was a disgrace that he'd been jailed. Now, this is the same Nancy Pelosi who was giddy with joy at those protesters, the rioters, however you want to call them, that stormed the Capitol building, to see them banged up for a long time. Now, imagine if they had been backed by Russia, by, I don't know, Ecuador, by China. I'm trying to think of just different countries other than the usual ones that get thrown about. Obviously, that would be a massive, huge scandal. Similar thing in the United Kingdom, where we've heard those same old voices saying this is disgraceful that Starmer goes over there. Now, these are the same people in the Tory party who pushed for massive jail sentences for people after the 2011 riots. Obviously, those riots were terrible, terrible things that went on, but you saw people jailed for 7 years, 7 years plus, 7 years plus just about, in some cases for crimes that would have previously either received a suspended sentence or something, basically a slap on the wrist or a minor custodial sentence. So what happens is if you, and I don't think I'm going to shock anybody here, if you work with a foreign government to overthrow the government of the country that you are in, you will be charged under probably national security or even treason charges, treason laws. So there isn't much controversial about Lai has been sentenced to what he's been sentenced to. It's because he openly worked with foreign governments to try and overthrow the status quo of the government in Hong Kong. It would be a little bit like if I was to sit here in China and speak to, I don't know, somebody over in Timbuktu or wherever and decide that I wanted financing and backing to establish the independent Free Republic of Sunderland South. Now, I'm sure I would get a knock at the door.
There's a lot in that, Peter.
Yeah, free Hetton. I'm sure I would get a knock at the door before too long, or at least my mum and dad would get a knock at the door in Hetton to say, like, hang on, is he actually doing this, or is this just some kind of stunt for that podcast he does with that other weird kid? Yeah. But yeah, so look, these are all going to be problems for Keir Starmer. Everything Keir Starmer does is going to be a problem for him. I think what you have to hope for is that some of those industries that I spoke about before, whether it is what remains of British manufacturing, whether it is things like the whiskey industry, whether it is things like our soft power, that we do push against what is a partially open door and we make the most of what is an opportunity right now. I'll leave you with something on this point, though. Just before I got on the plane over here, I was speaking to Dr. Michael Bolton. He's the former Minister for Foreign Affairs for the state of Hesse in Germany. So that's the state that includes Frankfurt, the big financial capital. And he was telling me that what people need to do right now, what Germany needs to do right now, because we've got Friedrich Merz arriving here on the 24th of February, I believe. And he's saying is Germany needs to find reliable partners right now because the United States is not a reliable partner at the moment. And one country that hadn't let Germany down over the years, and you've got to remember, I think it's out of the last 9 years, 8 of them, China has been Germany's largest trading partner. The partner that hasn't let them down has been China. And he was very keen for Friedrich Merz to come over here and to try and rekindle that relationship because that relationship has suffered a little bit in the time that Friedrich Merz has been in charge. Because if you cast your minds back to Angela Merkel, Angie, well, she was over in China all the time. In fact, she visited China more than any other European leader. Yes, I know she was in power for a long time, but still, she always made the trip. Olaf Scholz, remember him? Not many will. His first trip as Chancellor was to jump on a plane and come to Beijing. Now, Friedrich Merz has been in charge for over a year and he hasn't done that. And a lot of those big companies in Germany are looking over at China right now and thinking, come on, we need that trade to try and boost the stagnant German economy. So it can work the same for the UK. If they're looking for a reliable trade partner and the United States isn't that reliable trade partner right now, China could very well fill that role. And finally, when trust feels shaky, money moves. Gold, silver, crypto are all back in the conversation.
When political or economic uncertainty rises, investors often move towards more defensive assets. Gold has historically been viewed as a store of value during instability. Silver plays both an industrial and a monetary role. Crypto is increasingly discussed as a digital hedge, though it remains highly volatile. Just check out the last few weeks. Recent market moves show renewed interest in these assets as inflation, geopolitical tension, and political risk remain part of the global backdrop. Yeah, where do we start on this type of stuff?
Well,
Are you
I have
gonna
a
ask me
question off the
questions?
top.
Yeah.
I have a question off the top. What is a digital hedge? I know what a hedge is, and I know what digital is. Come on, fill me in.
So I don't think it's one that we can kind of use like the trimmers to turn. I don't think it's that type of thing, no. So the idea is simplistically, and there isn't an easy way to describe it. If the world feels rough and there's uncertainty, people feel the need to go to safer assets. Now, digital hedge is a bit different. We'll cover this bit off first. So gold would be a decent place to start, I suppose. Gold, in times of uncertainty, people rush towards that because it's tangible, it's there, it's shiny, it's lovely. I sound like Donald Trump myself describing gold. I wanted the impression, shiny gold. The reason why people go to it is because in periods of uncertainty, they say, well, there's a store of value there, and I know at some point I might be able to exchange this shiny thing to somebody else for an amount of money priced in dollars, right? So again, I say this quite often, there could be an entire show about this, but a hedge would be, I don't think there's good news on the horizon, so I'll go to somewhere perceived to be safe. And actually, that rush from risk on assets, shares, to risk off assets, gold, drives the price of gold up. But of course, gold doesn't give you anything apart from the piece of gold you've got. It doesn't produce a yield. It doesn't give you an income. So the hedge in itself is hedging against risk, making sure that they're kind of not having all your eggs in one basket. Now, a digital hedge, a lot of people have tried to make the assumption that Bitcoin in particular could be seen similarly, in as much as it's got a store of value. There's only so much gold in the ground. We don't know how much we can mine. The thing with Bitcoin is, and I have to hands up here, I'm not an expert in Bitcoin, but there's only so many that can ever be mined. So that the fact that there's scarcity means it could be perceived to be similar. Only so much gold in the ground, only so many Bitcoins that can be digitally mined. So, answer your question, a hedge against risk is one thing. A digital hedge isn't a green thing that we can cut into a shape. It's going to be using Bitcoin as I think the world's risky. I'd rather move into something they can perceive to be safe. Having said that, since I kind of half dabbled myself in October and bought some Bitcoin because it dipped below 100,000, I think I'm single-handedly to blame for the precipitous fall of Bitcoin's value over the last 6 months. And I only did it only a modest amount of money just to see what it was all about. And I feel like I understand it even less than I did when I started. And it's for that reason why, for the regular man on the street, it seems like something difficult to understand or conceive of. I think we had a chat a little before. One day, a different time, if we can get somebody who can claim to be an expert in crypto or a big proponent of that for me to ask them questions, I think maybe if the listeners might be interested in doing a segment just on that for people to fully understand that.
Absolutely. I am 100% behind that because there are definitely some people who will get on to come and speak about Bitcoin, about different types of crypto. I have no idea either. I think I have somewhere a couple of €100 worth of Doge that I think I bought because like I was like, well, right, well, this seems to be something. I've clearly missed the boat with Bitcoin, so let's try and get on this. No idea what it's worth. Couldn't even tell you how.
Tell the listeners your Bitcoin story, because I like this one. Just it.
Okay, boys and
When
girls.
was it?
So
When was it? Set the scene.
right, this must have been around 2012, maybe 2011. I just moved to Berlin to start working there. And there was the cameraman I work with, he knows a few people who are into this whole world of computers. See, this is how good I am with it. He knows blokes that are like into computers and that like. Anyway, the we had this one cafe, this one bar in Berlin that said they accept Bitcoin now. So TV journalist, I thought, right, that's a great thing. We go along and we buy some stuff. So I sit down, they bring me my burger, my big, lovely cheeseburger, and I take out my phone that they've installed this Bitcoin wallet on. And I think I ended up paying 8 Bitcoins. He just like transferred me 8 Bitcoins onto my phone, into this wallet. I then paid 8 Bitcoins for this burger. Brilliant news story, great stuff. Forgets all about it. I mean, you might not think this, but honestly, as I do this for a job, once those reports are done, quite often they're just chip paper to me. Like I've moved on to the next story. Well, of course, weeks, months progress, Bitcoin starts coming into the news. Stan, the cameraman, starts messaging me going, did any of that stay on your phone? Do you have any of those? It didn't. Of course, how much would 8 Bitcoin run to these days, Stephen?
Oh, well, yeah, it's not as much today as it was 6 months ago, but 6 months ago, Bitcoin would have been $800,000.
Great, great,
Yeah,
great, great,
it's okay
great.
though. Now it's closer to $450,000.
Oh, well, I'm sure my daughter will love to hear that in later
Buy
years
the
when I tell
buy
this
the
story.
buy
But
the buy the dip. Actually, no, that's not financial advice. Don't do that. I'm not telling anybody to do that
yeah,
at all.
none of this is financial
No.
advice. Do not buy the dip. We're telling you literally the stories from our life about why you should not do things that you don't understand or know about.
So
Yeah, so I
crypto's
probably spent
different.
about I probably spent about 800 grand on a cheeseburger. Honestly, can't even tell you if it was any good. I was working, so I probably took one bite out of one side for one take, held it the other way with my hand to do another take. I'm not even sure if I finished the burger. Uh, all right, back into our questions. If someone listening feels uneasy about instability, how should they think about gold, silver, or crypto in a sensible portfolio? I know diversification, you say, is
Yeah.
always the key, but is it as simple as have a little bit of everything?
It's nearly as simple as, I mean, if you are feeling uneasy, I guess that's a pretty human emotion. Markets always feel uncertain when you're actually in the middle of it, because that's just the news as we're hearing this stuff. We should act. I think I've said this before. Human nature, fight or flight, we're literally conditioned to always feel like we need to make a decision. But whether it's gold or silver or crypto, they're not really necessarily magic shields that are going to protect us from everything. They're just, as you said, there's simply different types of asset. Gold historically is held up when currencies have a wobble or politics get a bit messy. And that's probably the reason why there's been such a tear over the last couple of years. 200% rise over the last 2 or 3 years on gold. But by the time two podcast heads are going, do you think you should buy gold? Or your Uber driver says, I bought some gold the other day. It's kind of that, I think it might have been Rockefeller and just before the Great Depression, but saying, by the time the shoe shine boy's giving you tips, the stock market's in a bubble. And that was his direct quote. I might be misphrasing who it was, but it was the quote. And it's the same, I would guess the same with this as well. So it's a good idea for portfolios to have some allocation. Most pensions will, but mainly in the actual stocks that mine them, not directly in the gold itself. Silver's interesting because gold has got some industrial use. You've got to get inside some kind of microchips and stuff. But silver's used in solar panels. Literally used in big industrial, and there's more of it, presumably, around the world. don't know whether I don't. Is China a big miner of silver for those rare earths that Donald Trump talks about? And I do know that I need to become a bit
I'm
more of an
sure they
expert on
will
this. But
mine silver. I'm sure they will mine gold. I honestly don't know too much about these type of special. What do they call
we'll
precious
try not to.
metals?
Yeah, we'll try not to be too much of non-experts talking about it. But from an investment perspective,
It's a bit
it's
late for
there.
that, Stephen. We're 6 episodes in.
Oh yes, okay, not financial advice. So when we talk about those hedges against risk, that's what they're there for. But it's ultimately speculative. That's the reason why it's got up and fallen by about silver fell by 30% last week. This is not these are not normal behaviors. And crypto's different again. So although you said there was a digital hedge, or it's often described as digital gold, in practice it acts more like, or acts even more like a risk asset. So in the last 2 weeks, it's fell by a fifth. These are big swings. So if we are saying buy these things to hedge against bad things happening, it's not. You're still going to get awful lot of volatility. So my boring answer again, the bigger principle is asset allocation. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Spread them across different assets that behave differently. And here's the crucial bit: they behave differently at different times. Often, when one thing falls, something else rises. So if someone feels nervous, the better question is not what to add; it's whether the portfolio they've already got is actually diversified. So don't use that as I'm worried, what should I do? Actually, look at what you already have and then review that. That would be a good idea to seek some financial advice.
I have one quick question.
Shoot.
If these are the places that people look to put their money in uncertain times, and times, as you said, are uncertain, or certainly people speaking to you are saying, oh, times are hard, there are tough times these days. Why are they lowering in cost if people would seemingly be putting their money there?
So it's quite a complicated thing, that I think, because a lot of it would take gold and silver. People are going to go to a jewelry shop and they're going to buy a small ingot of silver or a coin, right? That's only a fraction of the market. Technology means that people can buy, where to get kind of detailed here, fractional parts of gold, exposure to it via what's called electronically traded funds, ETFs. When people pile money in, automatically follows the market. So that's its sentiment. When gold hit $100, a lot of people would have wanted to take profit. So when they took the money out, that affects the gold market and it drops. It's not to do with people going around actually physically buying and mining anymore. It's the actions of big institutional investment companies. So there's a lot of parts there to answer your question, but that's it. There's only so many people trading actual bits of gold. A lot of it's on this speculative price, and that's why I said it's acting like a risk-on asset at the moment rather than a perceived safe haven. But then the only thing that's for certain, if you get 100 economists in the room, they're all going to disagree with themselves. So we've got, I think it was Deutsche Bank said they predict gold to hit $6,000 an ounce, and then there was somebody based in the UK saying we see it falling back down to 3,000. Well, that's quite a big gap between those two things. One of them's going to be true, one of them's going to be wrong. The likelihood is going to be somewhere in the middle. Diversification is rarely exciting, but it's what allows investors to stay disciplined. So sorry, I've got no excellent, exciting advice there. It's just do the basics, and you'll be all right.
Keep it disciplined. Do the basics. Speak to professionals before you do anything. Right, that's our show this week. Scandals affect trust, as we've heard. Diplomacy affects access. Fear affects where capital flows, but none of it's random. Incentives and confidence drive behaviour. If you enjoyed this episode, follow the show and share it with somebody who wants to understand how money really works.
And again, if you've got a topic you want us to break down, please let us know. We're always looking for things to talk about.
We'll see you next week, though. Bye-bye.
See you next week. Bye.